my good friends, death is the liberator of the pious and the moment of enslavement of the unjust. Death ends poverty. Death ends sickness. Death ends hardship. Death ends sadness for the pious. But for the oppressor, for the unjust, death is the beginning of sickness and pain. It is the beginning of sadness and sorrow. It is the beginning of poverty and misery. That's a fact, my dear friends. That's a solid fact which we derive from the holy words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for the pious, for the righteous, for the just, death is a moment of celebration, not a celebration of people, for they have lost you, but a celebration within yourself. You see, there's no mysteries left or unsaid information left about the Holy Qur'an, because that is why the book is there. The book is there to answer the major questions which we cannot answer. And one of the major questions that human beings always faced was, what happens when we die? What happens when I die? And the book has not left us in suspense regarding what happens when we die. For there are several verses that clarify very, very clearly what the process is when you die. And in summary, we can derive from the words of the Qur'an a few clear facts of the moment or the process of dying. Number one is that we have all had exercise or practice in dying. We have all had practice for dying our entire lives, because the Qur'an states that He is the one who takes your souls when you go to bed at night. And so every night when you lose consciousness, when you go to bed and you recite some words of praise to God and thanks, and you fall into sleep, you have experienced death, my dear friend. That is exactly what the Qur'an states. And I'll show you the verse. Where Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وهو الذي يتوفاكم بالليل. It is He who does take your souls by night and has knowledge of all that you have done by day. And so that mystery is cleared up for us, that we have practice, we have experienced wafa, or the losing of consciousness in this world. And then the next mystery, number two, that the Qur'an clarifies is what happens in the grave when we die, when we are carried off, when our body is lowered into the ground, or when we are buried in any other way. Then the Qur'an also makes that clear. Time will stop. All experience, all perception of time will end. And you will not experience anything in that point where you are retained in a state of barzakh, or in a state of limbo, where you are not conceiving or perceiving any experience. And that is clarified. I'm not making that up. That is clarified as follows. Once again, that question is clarified. Chapter 2, verse 259. أو كالذين مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال. Or take the similitude of the one who passed by a hamlet, a small town, all in ruins, to its roofs. He said, "Oh, how shall Allah bring it ever to life after this, its death?" But Allah caused him to die for 100 years, then raised him up again and said, "How long did thou tarry thus?" He said, "Perhaps a day, or part of a day." He said, "Nay, but thou hast tarried thus 100 years. So clearly from this verse, what we read and what we understand from the words of the Almighty is that a person is given death for 100 years, and upon re-entering life perceives that 100 years as being only a day or part of a day, not even an entire day, so a number of hours. And that, my friend, clarifies the second question, and that is, what happens when we die? We do not experience anything. We are left, we do not experience time, in fact. So time as a reality ends, because time is associated with being alive and being conscious. And that is why when you go to bed at night and you have a good sleep, a very deep sleep, you don't perceive 8 hours of lying in your bed and looking at the ceiling. You don't perceive anything. The time went by like a few minutes or like 5 minutes. Time has stopped for you. And that clarifies the second mystery of death that the Qur'an clarifies for you and me. And the final question that I want to address is, when is the day of judgment? Is it 10 million years into the future, 1 million years? For each one of us, the day of judgment is when we arise from our state of death, when we are awoken from our state of death, from the big sleep, the big sleep, the big death, when we are awoken, then we will experience judgment. And that judgment will be as described in the holy verses of the text of the Qur'an. It is a matter of accounting for your actions in front of your Creator. And that is not long into the future. In other words, it is, if you die in 10 years or 5 years or tomorrow, it will be the next thing that you will experience shortly after dying. So for all of us, those who died 2,000 years ago, those who died 500 years ago, those who will die in 10,000 years time still, will all experience the reawakening and the judgment at the end of our natural lives. So it is not something far into the future. Stop thinking it is something that is you're going to lie in your grave and you're going to turn around and feel uncomfortable and angels and demons will visit you. That's all fabrications, tales, stories that were made up. And the only thing you can be faithful and trusting in, trust with all your heart and all your soul, is that your God is just, that there will be no injustice done unto you. Because that is also promised. And maybe I should make that number 4, where Allah says, not the least injustice will be done to you. You will receive exactly what you deserve. And you can always count on the kindness and the mercy of God. And He says, for those liars who say that God is not just, God is not necessarily just. Yeah, this is the verse that we live by. Inna Allah La yazlimu mithqala dharratin. Allah is never unjust in the least degree. If there is any good done, He doubleth it and giveth from His own presence a great reward. And so, my dear friends, death is not a tragedy for us. It's a tragedy for our families, yes. But it is a moment of liberation. It is a moment of freedom. It's a moment of reward. It's a moment of reward. It's the moment when we experience the justice, the kindness, the mercy of God. And that is how we regard death, if we have true, sincere acceptance of the word from God.